Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Women and Girls Research Alliance Fall Research and Practice Panel Series. I want to welcome you to our December panel, Women in Public Service Leadership. We are so excited to have you here today and to be a part of this wonderful discussion with this august panel of women who serve in leadership positions. I want to remind you, as usual, for all of our other panels to place your questions in the chat so that our moderator will be able to see them and ask your questions to our panel. Again, this session will be recorded and we will post it by this Friday. I am Dr. Michelle Meggs. I am the Executive Director of the Women and Girls Research Alliance, and again, welcome to our discussion. At this time, I am going to turn our discussion over to our most able moderator, Dr. Jaclyn Piatak, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science here at UNT Charlotte, Department of Political Science and Public Administration. And she will again serve as our moderator for today. Dr. Piatak, I turn it over to your most capable hands.
Great, thanks so much. Is the PowerPoint showing up? Okay, thanks. Show up on my end, sorry guys. So, let me shift this. Too many screens. Okay, here we go. Is it showing now? Someone unmute.
Try sharing again.
Okay, thanks. Here we go. So I'm excited to have three of our amazing alums from the Gerald G. Fox program join us today to talk about leadership. And I want most of the time devoted to our discussion, but first we'll share research that I did with Jared McDonald, a postdoc that was with us here at UNCC, and Zach Moore, that was supported with a grant from the Women and Girls Research Alliance. So that work is the role of gender in government and nonprofit workplaces and experimental analysis of rule compliance and supervisor trust. So we know that there continues to be gender disparity in a lack of representation at the leadership level, but we look at once women reach the leadership level, do women face even more additional hurdles in managing employees? More specifically, how does gender and gender congruence influence employee rule following and supervisor trust? So to begin with, we look at role incongruity theory, where people are evaluated by the extent to which they conform to social roles. So gender and leadership stereotypes often conflict. When people think manager, they may think male and a male leadership style. And as Stivers describes, we look to current leaders for our ideas of what and who leaders are, and these ideas serve as filters, screening out everyone but those who meet the accepted standards. Therefore, leaders remain the same, and so do the standards. So based on role incongruity and gender bias, we hypothesize employees with female supervisors will be less likely to follow rules and have lower levels of trust in supervisors. Gender congruence or gender match may matter even more than the gender of one supervisor. So if I'm a female with a female manager. So we also look at gender congruence. And just as previous literature has found that people are more likely to co-produce, for example, recycling programs if they see women in leadership positions. So based on this symbolic representation, and also the incongruence of leadership styles, like women who conform to masculine leadership styles are sometimes criticized, but those who don't may be viewed as less powerful. So women are in this double bind of following the male leadership style and going against their gender stereotype, or following a female leadership style and maybe being perceived as less of a leader. So since these commingle with one another, we then look at gender congruence and hypothesize that men with female supervisors will be less likely to follow rules and have lower levels of trust in female supervisors. Lastly, we look at role formalization. So written roles have been found to help establish a neutral authority, focus attention, and convey legitimacy. And formalization has been linked to reductions in unbureaucratic personality, more logical design, and higher levels of compliance. And previous work has found that people are more likely to comply with written rules rather than unwritten rules. So, but this may be even more beneficial to women who may rely on formal rules to legitimize their authority. So lastly, we hypothesize that employees will be more likely to follow rules of a female supervisor if they're written rather than unwritten, and also have higher levels of trust. So to test these hypotheses, we use a 2x2 experiment, one in a nonprofit context and one in a government, and we vary whether rules are written or unwritten and the gender of the supervisor. The sample, thanks to the Women and Girls Research Alliance, we were able to purchase a YouGov sample to be more representative. And our first experiment, we placed respondents in the role of a middle-level manager and whether or not they would follow the rule when someone's late to work a number of times in a row. And then in the nonprofit context, we placed someone in the role of a foundation providing grant funding and whether or not they would accept a late grant. So what do we find? Well, first here is rule following by the gender of the supervisor. We don't find any significant gender differences. However, we find significant differences when you look at trust. So respondents found male supervisors more trustworthy in the government experiment. Following gender congruence and rule following, we find gender congruence plays a significant role in rule following in the government context, where men are more likely to follow rules given by men and women are more likely to follow rules given by women. However, gender congruence only significantly influences trust for men in the government context. And like past research, we find written rules increase rule following across the board, regardless of gender. However, we also find written rules help combat that gender bias in supervisor trust, where written rules enhance supervisor trust for all except for male supervisors, and they already had high levels of trust regardless of the rule. So our key findings, we find that respondents are more likely to comply with managers that match their gender, and men are more likely to comply with men. Women are more likely to comply with women. However, we find a gender bias in trust where both men and women find male supervisors more trustworthy, and that gender congruence only enhances that trust for men. But one way to combat this gender bias is by formalizing rules, as written rules help to reduce the bias. So both men and women are found to be less trusting of women managers in line with role incongruity theory. Respondents may view women leaders as conflicting with stereotypical images of leaders. However, we know there are tons of benefits of women in leadership, from greater gender integration throughout the organization, more inclusive work environments, women actively representing women issues, and the symbolic effect of women in leadership. So when rules are conveyed in writing rather than verbally, managers are viewed just as trustworthy as men. So the implications of our work is that written rules can help reduce this gender bias. And this builds on the growing work on formalization of written rules, and they enhance not only compliance, but also may address this gender gap in trust. So Thanks again to the Women and Girls Research Alliance. I will stop sharing my screen as I want to open this up for discussion. So I'd like to begin by asking the panelists to share your journey in public service, introduce yourself and to what position you're in. And let's start with Lauren. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Lauren Tayara. I moved to Charlotte about 8 years ago, just as an intern for Habitat for Humanity. And I ended up working in the private sector and then found my way back to the public sector, wanting to work for local government or nonprofit. So I went to UNC Charlotte. I have a master's of public administration with concentrations in urban policy and nonprofit management. I am currently enrolled in a fintech program at UNC Charlotte, so financial technology, which kind of comes from my background. I worked for 3 years after grad school as a budget analyst for county government. And I currently work for Centralina Regional Council as their government affairs and member engagement coordinator. And I work on, special technical projects and outreach to members. That's it.
Thanks, Lauren.
Is it my turn now?
Yeah, sure. Let's go with Karen.
All right. So my journey through public service started really in my undergraduate program where I was studying journalism, and I didn't realize I was fascinated with local government, and no one told me to walk across the quad to the School of Government at UNC Chapel Hill. I had no idea that it was even an option as a profession. So I graduated, I worked in the private sector for a couple of years in the high-tech areas in RTP, and then ended up getting a job as an account coordinator at a marketing firm in Concord, North Carolina, which had the City of Kannapolis communications account. And that evolved over 6 or 7 years into becoming the communications director for Kannapolis. I loved that work. I loved that role, but I was working for a private company, a marketing company during the middle of the Great Recession. And as all of my peers were getting laid off or furloughed, I said, I like this local government thing a whole lot. Maybe I should go actually work for one of the local governments in the region for some job security, because at the time we had our first child too, an infant in daycare. So joined the city of Charlotte through Charlotte Water, which was fantastic. I was hired as a PIO, and through the city of Charlotte's benefits program, I was able to get my master's in public administration from UNCC. So they paid for it. I did it at night. And kind of midway towards the end of the program, I changed jobs at the city and went to the budget office, which I think is really important. I want to touch on later around gender roles and norms and who gets hired as leaders. It became very clear to me that if I wanted to advance in the organization, I had to be perceived as someone who understood finance and budget. So I went and got a job in finance and budget. And from there, went into the city manager's office before year and a half, almost 2 years ago, took the job as the assistant town manager in Davidson. So that's been my journey through, and it involved really recognizing that the private sector wasn't for me, the importance of broadening a skill set in a way that men would respond to quite candidly, given our conversation, and then kind of into the current position.
Thanks, Karen. Phin?
Oh, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Phin. So a little bit about myself. So I went to school. I'm an undergraduate at Western Carolina University, and major in political science. So I knew when I went to college, that's what I wanted to do. So graduated from Western, started graduate school at Western Carolina, then transfer to UNC Charlotte. So I graduated with a MPA way back then in 1995. So after graduation, I stayed here in Charlotte and work for the city of Charlotte. So in learning and organizational development for about 7 years, 7 years. And I got into a diversity management, started a diversity management effort for the city for a couple of years. And then I left to come to work for Mecklenburg County to do two things, to transform human resources and to lead diversity management for Mecklenburg County. And I've been in several roles here at Mecklenburg County since I started 15 years ago. And currently I serve as the diversity manager for Mecklenburg County, overseeing our effort in terms of our focusing on equity and inclusion, in that perspective that we center our work around equity, and that it's a commitment from the organization to address institutional systemic issues inherent in our policies, practices, and procedure. So, and the procedures that, you know, disproportionately impact or burden people of color mainly. And so that's been my role over the last 4 years, but I've been in this field, in the DEI field, over 20 years. And like I said, I am truly a public servant. My whole career has been serving the public and serving internal workforce. So I am delighted to be part of the conversation. And one thing that I want to say is, we're talking about women in leadership positions. I'm one of those that stay true to myself. And some of it's, you know, there's pros and cons of that. We can talk more about that, but that's who I am. I speak the truth, and sometimes people don't want to hear it. So I get a lot of pushback sometimes, but with that, I'll pause here.
Thanks. Yeah, you all not only take on leadership roles in your organizations, but you've been involved in equity efforts too in your roles. So I'd love to talk more about that later on as well. So let's start off by connecting to Zach and my work with the Women and Girls Research Alliance through our grant project. Have you guys noticed rules playing a role in your careers, or using formal rules as an asset, using them to legitimize authority, or in any of your work? And if not, that's fine, and we can move on.
I'd say yes, it has. So it definitely helps to establish, you know, that authority or whatever you're trying to convey whenever it is written. And I think in my own work, I've realized that early on, and I wanted to make manuals. I wanted to have things written in documents to make sure that, you know, hey, if you know, we're working through a process, we're working through the whole, you know, budget year, or even a special technical project, that I can refer back to that document every time, and everybody has it. So you can refer back to it when you need to. I would also say, just like writing an email, just make sure, you know, like make sure you write something in an email, you can refer back to it also. But then also having your whatever documents or whatever policies or whatever you need, kind of given that stamp of approval from leadership helps as well. And I think that's what kind of establishes that authority in my experience.
Yeah, and I would say from the seat that I sit in now, Jaclyn, where it really helps is by the time an employee is sitting in front of me, we're typically in a really bad kind of juncture of, are they going to stay with the organization, or are they going to make some improvements? And candidly, when I first got to Davidson, I think a few folks thought, oh, it's a woman, she'll be soft, I can, you know, kind of talk my way out of it. And it was very helpful. You know, I'm really thankful for our strong HR, you know, public works director, who had everything written, everything documented. Our personnel policies are very clear. They're consistently updated, and credit to them for that. And I was able to say, no, here are the things and here is why. And what I think could have been a much more difficult set of conversations with a few different people was a lot easier because of that formalization. And I think, like I said, it really helped move past the gender variance and into, here's what the expectation is, here's what the accountability is, here's why the team needs you to perform in this way. We're too small if you don't. And so it got to that part of the conversation pretty quickly.
So I'll just add just quickly on this question. I think it's important. Yes, I truly believe that having written rules is important. But at the same time, I don't think that men are held accountable to having those rules written and follow those rules. So I think that the expectations women should have all these documentations, but then you don't expect that from the male counterparts in leadership. Just because it's that trust that you mentioned, Jaclyn, to your presentation. They trust them more, but then when you are dealing with a situation, you have to have documentation, you have to have procedures. So I think there's double standards, even though I think it's important, but I see that happen through, especially in my career working with leadership. I work with, particularly when new leaders in my roles, in probably this role is in organization development. I help coach some of our leaders, and I see that pattern constantly. So I think there's that double standard.
Thanks, Phin. And that's
Can I just say something really quick?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, sometimes I kind of think that that's on purpose so that you don't have to follow the rules every time, and there isn't a black and white and there is a gray area. And I have seen that with men, so.
Well, that's a great segue to my next question. What barriers and challenges do you see in local government for women, or have you faced or encountered in your work in trying to address those barriers? And just for the audience here, I have a few facilitated discussion questions, and then we'll open it up. So feel free to start sharing questions in the chat if you'd like, as they pop into your head. Thanks.
I'd love to jump in if that's okay with Phin and Lauren. I alluded it to in my opening comments. I think there is a perception about what a career path looks like in local government, that you must go through a finance or budget office, that you have to check these boxes, or that you leave your MPA program and go out to a really, really small community as town manager and work your way up that way. And what that approach misses, I think, is some of the values you talked about in women leadership around empathy and perspective and what women bring. And typically women are drawn to different fields than budget and finance. They're drawn to communications, they're drawn to human resources. And it is very rare for women in local government to start in one of those places and make their way up to the kind of executive function of the local government. And I think that's around the value set. And it's interesting to me, especially in the communication space, because if you are the communications director or PIO for an organization, you're in all the difficult conversations. You're part of all that decision-making that's happening behind the scenes. You've got that experience, but it's, I think, perceived less than, in a lot of ways because of who sits in those jobs, because primarily women have those jobs. And I think that that is something, I know a lot of phenomenal communications directors and PIOs around the state who would like to move into the next level position, and they just can't get that traction. So I think that's a significant barrier here in our local governments. And then the other one, and I think this is getting better kind of as generational shift, is the residency requirements. Candidly, I'm not the primary breadwinner in our household, and we kind of function around my husband's job and my kids' schooling. And I think women are less likely to pick up and move for a position than men are. And like I said, that's evolving. There's not a residency requirement in Davidson. I know there's other places where there's not. The town of Duck doesn't have one. I learned last week doing assessment centers for their town manager, but that's another, I think, legacy kind of requirement out there that provides a barrier systematically.
So I'll jump in here. I think that women, for a couple of things, women face a lot of barriers and challenges. I truly believe that. I think partly just because being a woman, you sometimes put into position in leadership positions without authority. So I think that it's, making sure that, oh, we need a woman in this seat, even in public, even in the public sector, there's that notion that we need more diversity, right, in terms of women in leadership positions. But when you get there, you're not having the same, I think, authority as men do. And I think women face every day in terms of being scrutinized and challenged on every single decisions, I think. Especially in my role currently, I think partly it's because of the job. It comes with the territory, but at the same time, why is it that every single decision, every single action you get scrutinized? So I think women have these barriers that they are, living every day in terms of trying to work through the organizational protocols and so on. I have seen, in recently, I'll give you an example of someone that I know who is a woman of color who has this tremendous potential for leadership in even, in bigger positions. But she wasn't giving that opportunity, that very limited in terms of her role, and decided to leave and start her own consulting company just because of not having that same level of influence. And the other issue I think that comes along with this, the barrier that she faced, was the fact that her the agency director and her supervisors are all white men. So that, and she's an African-American female. So I think that comes with the territory as well. And that women of color especially, I think, deal with all kinds of challenges just because of you being a woman. And on top of that, you are a woman of color.
And I'm so glad that you brought up that, feeling like you're questioned a lot, because that was exactly what I said for this topic, was almost like having your motives questioned on a regular basis. And there are things like, I'm a big questioner in meetings, and, maybe your male counterpart can come into a meeting and ask a bunch of questions, and it's just like everybody answers them. But when you ask them, maybe it's a nuisance or a burden, or, why are you asking that? Why are you, what are your motives in doing that? I also think that men are able to flip-flop on topics, on their, on their responses or answers for things. Whereas, if we flip flop, we're called out on it. We're, told why, you said this before, and now, like, you can't change your mind. It's almost like a question of your intelligence on that topic. And then also, so I've worked with North Carolina Local Government Budget Association. I have actually moderated a lot of panels for them. And had Karen on one. We talked about mentorship, and that to me is the biggest thing. There are not a lot of mentors for females, especially in smaller local governments. And if they are in the smaller local governments, they have more of like an old school mentality, and it almost feels like it's a woman eat woman world out there. Like, I'm going to bring you down so that I can, become better. But, and I feel like this generation is bringing in a whole new idea of like, we need to lift each other up. We need to help each other. We need to make each other leaders. So that big topic of being a mentor, I think that's a big barrier of, leading up to a leadership position, so that you can, get that teaching, that learning from someone who came before you, and do it better the next time, or do it, differently the next time. So.
Thanks, Lauren. And that's a good segue to my next question, and one that the audience had as well. But first, I just want to say, when I started my career in public service, I was in the federal government, and I was fortunate to begin with an all-female office. It was all women, some who worked their way up from the secretary level up to like the GS 13 level in management positions. And it was amazing to start my career in that sort of supportive environment. And my supervisor, who was near retirement, I had lots of questions and things too, Lauren. And she's like, go get evidence, build your case. So don't lose the questioning, but, make your case and go forward. But speaking of mentoring and other things, what advice do you have for young women aspiring to pursue leadership positions?
Lauren, you go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I I have a list here, yeah. Okay, so be yourself, always be yourself. Don't tone it down for anybody. Learn from your mistakes, admit when you're wrong out loud. Lead with compassion and use those stereotypical feminine qualities to your advantage. So we're, more likely to be empathetic, we're great listeners, multitaskers. Use that to your advantage and don't let, I know that sometimes male mentors can tell you to tone stuff like that down. Don't tone it down. Be yourself and use that to your advantage. Lift others up around you and make sure you make them feel valued. Very important. Say it out loud, make them feel valued. Be a mentor in a real and genuine way. Reach out to them. Make sure that communication is always open. Look me up if you need a mentor. I'm always there for anybody. And then also recognize when people need your help and be willing to work with them and teach them. You are never, when you're in a leadership position, you're not above someone. You have that opportunity to help them and teach them in a real way that will put them in a leadership position later on.
Yeah, so I similar thoughts as Lauren indicated as well here, but I'll add the fact that I think, for me, word of advice is just try to figure it out how to work within the system, but don't use yourself to the system. So what I mean by that, you have to be yourself. Continue to be yourself, but we also have to figure it out, how do we become more political savvy in what we do? So keep that in mind. But I strongly suggest that you need to stay true to yourself, speak the truth. As they say, truth to power, right? So speak the truth to power, meaning the fact that if there is something that really that you should, that you think it's absolutely the wrong direction, you need to speak up. So stand up for that, stand up to what you believe in. And I think it's important that we as women support each other and speak up and be there for one another. Find mentors, just like Lauren said. I think it's important that we connect with individuals. I've had mentors over my career, and it's since I've graduated, it's always someone that I look up to and have conversations with, talk about different situations. And I may not be in touch with them every day, but when I need something, I call them and say, what do you think about this? So find someone that you could rely on, and just continue to advocate for yourself. You have to be the one that speak about who you are, what you want, your desire and your needs. And what is it that you want to do to make an impact in the community, in your lives and the community. So that's just my couple of thoughts, Karen.
Yep, y'all covered pretty much everything I would say. I'll re-emphasize the importance of mentorship. And I have some phenomenal mentors. Some were formally appointed, some are informal, some way above me in an org chart, some were peers. And so be looking for those relationships. And then also professional associations, dive into those, get involved, build a network, not just inside your organization, but across whatever geographic footprint. And local government, that's the state of North Carolina. Lauren mentioned the North Carolina Local Government Association. That has been really important to me in my career, being involved with that group of people. There's always somebody I can call now, regardless of what the topic is. And that's helpful to have kind of some trusted folks out there in different organizations. So that's what I would add, Phin and Lauren, to what you said eloquently.
So Karen, you may be able to relate to this one. So I have a 3-year-old, so these resonate with me as well. What do you do when you're trying to do all the things? Is kind of a question from Sarah Pulton. And then Laura has one that's similar. Sometimes people stereotype, right, if you're a mom, that you won't want to take on leadership positions. So those kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, so I'm the working mom. I have 3 children. 2 in elementary school and then 1 who's 2 years old. And first and foremost, I have to say, and I say this every time, and you can probably hear me right now because we're in COVID times, I cannot do it without my spouse, because we have this ongoing, who's going to take who where, what does that look like? And we've kind of divvied things up. He handles all things errand running. I handle all things medical, but just really getting into that, kind of the way that works. And then also I'm really jealous and protective of certain family things. And I think that that's harder for women to do. I think when men do it, it's like, oh, look, he's, a family guy, and that's important. And if I do it, it's like, well, of course, because, she's the mom. But things like, if it's my kid's birthday, I'm not going to be at work that afternoon because we're going to go do something fun together. If there are certain events that are important, I'm also very jealous of my time for evening and weekend activities. Obviously in my role in non-pandemic times, there's a lot of community commitments, and I really like that, and those are really important. But I also try to keep a close eye on what's going on at home and where that balance is. And it's a continuing, evolving struggle. And I come at it, honestly, from a really fortunate place. We have access to great daycare. My kids are in a great Gerald Mecklenburg elementary school. And so I recognize that I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I do with the family support systems in place.
Thanks, Karen. And that's actually how I invited Karen for this panel. I was at a conference and tweeted that I was appreciative of my supportive spouse because it comes down to gender roles, right? And men are just as much parents as women are parents. So they're not babysitting their kids. And yeah, so thanks, Karen. And that feeds into another question about work-life balance more broadly, as you were talking about protecting your time. So there was a question, what advice would you give in developing a balanced work-life relationship? It can be a pressure for women to have a solid and perfect work-life balance.
So this is Phin. I honestly, I did not do a good job with that in my first 15 years of my career. Let me just say that. I think I spent my entire, time just trying to do the best job that I could, getting involved in the community, serving on boards, serving on, creating nonprofits, you name it, just all kinds of activities, programs and things. And I've just kind of lost sight of the importance of work-life balance. And I think I kind of woke up probably about 10 years ago thinking that, what am I doing all this for? And recognizing that I need to spend time with family, friends, and do what I need to do to be successful, but not from the detriment of my friends and family. So I learned that a hard way, and now I've sort of pick and choose what I want to be involved in, and work, it's going to be there regardless of what happens. Even just in the work that I do, we've been at it for 300 years. So, it's not going to go away. And, addressing systemic institutional racism in our country is not going to go away. So recognizing that, that you got to find a balance, that you need to, it's important that you put work, secondary, I think for me, than it is first, where I was the opposite before. So, so those of you that are coming up and in the early of your career, remember family is so important. Make family your first priority. Everything else will follow. That's my advice.
Yeah, I got some really good advice from a male supervisor along the way. It was about the time I was in the grad program at UNCC, and I had a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. And he just sat me down and said, my biggest regret is not going to throw the ball with my son more. So don't lose that opportunity. And so I think that that is something that really resonated. And I would encourage everybody to keep that front and center.
I'd agree. I think that COVID has really slowed us all down. And for me, it's been a big kind of wake up call to, hey, I put everything I have into work and into my job and trying to move up and trying to be, this leader and this great person at my job. And And then when COVID happened and I've spent a lot of time at home, I'm like, don't have much going for me now. Like I need to connect with friends again. I need to go back home more often. And I think that it's really slowed me down and put me back in that perspective of, you know, what is most important. And yeah, so.
And can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Just from an organizational leadership standpoint too, it's really important for me to model that good work-life balance and good behavior. And so people don't feel the pressure that if their kid's sick, that it's going to be a problem, that they need to stay home, or if there's something going on, making sure that that approach filters out the organization, because that leads to better engaged workforce, lower turnover. So there's some things from that standpoint too that are important from the leadership standpoint.
And I want to add to that. I think this is something that I've done about 5 years now. I put into practice. When I'm on vacation, do not call me, do not email me, nothing. I don't take my phone with me, and there's 1 or 2 people who has my personal cell, and that's it. The organization, even you in leadership position, can still continue and function. It's not going to hurt anyone that you're not available because you're with family. You have taken vacation, take your vacation, leave your work phone at home. Leave that at home and then just enjoy your time with family and friends.
Thank you for important reminders these days. When the work-life boundaries are so blurred when we're all working from home, right? So there's an interesting question about working with elected officials. I know some of you do that. So when you find you're working with a female elected official, is there a sense of camaraderie, or do you think you face increased scrutiny as a female?
From my lens and my experience, very fortunate that we have a very collegial relationship with our town board, and the typical gender expectations kind of play out. And I found that at the city of Charlotte too. I think that I know some of the elected officials that I've worked with that are women have also been self-aware around women in leadership and challenges from an elected official's position, and have worked through their own kind of professional, personal development activities to really own their voice in the space of board meetings, similar to challenges that we find as staff and organizations. I think those same dynamics are at play. So I think that there is an area there of awareness around some of our women elected officials in North Carolina.
So a second part of Laura's question is about over apologizing. Do you ever find yourself apologizing at work and more than men in your workplace? And then great to have Casey Fleming. Hi, Casey, who also does work on rules. He's wondering, men often derive power from stereotypes and status quo as opposed to rules. So does it ever bother you to have to leverage more formal rules or evidence, or, you know, have to go prove yourself in the budgeting role, like you said, Karen, that sort of thing? So both do you have to take more of a female role and over apologizing, and then ever get frustrated that you have to prove yourself more at work?
I used to over
I think it's
apologize.
Yeah,
ahead,
me
Lauren.
too. Yeah.
I
I
used
was
to.
just gonna say, it's just it's like a balance. You have to, so like fake it till you make it type of thing. And I used to tell people, like I was a customer service representative way back in the day, and I would put this voice on when I got on the phone with disgruntled customers, and it was my like apple pie voice. And I'd be like, you know, well, I am so sorry. Let me check on that for, you know, like you don't have to feel it in your heart, but you know, like sometimes you put on this role to make it through situations with people. And I mean, I stopped apologizing a long time ago, because I mean, where's that going to go to constantly just be like, sorry, you know, like, yeah.
I had a mentor point out to me along the way that I apologized too much. Therein lies the value of mentorship, because I was completely unaware. And so that is something I have actively worked on over time in my career.
And I would say the same thing early in my career. Yeah, you apologize for every single thing that you do, right? But then, along the ways, been in this field for 25 years now, it's the fact that you don't need to apologize. You speak the truth, you do whatever you feel it's best. And if you make a mistake, yeah, you admit it, but and you move on, you learn from it, but doesn't mean that for, I think women in particular, I think have the tendency, we want to apologize for everything that we do. And I think it gets, I think the more you do, the expectation that you should do that all the time, for particularly for men. And I really think that we need to stand up for ourselves. We do, women, especially in leadership positions, stand up for yourself and just, it might not go the way that you want it, but you should not have to apologize. The men apologize for the things that they do know. And I see it happen every day that just because we have this idea that it's, it's about empathy, right? It's about being, speak the truth and as well as apologize for the things that we see that we did that may not be, appropriate, that might not be what expected. But I push back on that now. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. Why? I don't hear other people having to apologize for the things that they do. And if they forget that we have 2 meetings, scheduled and then never showed up, I don't see them apologizing. But when I go in and, I have to say that, I'm like, wait a minute, why am I doing all this? But you did not do that when you didn't show up for my meeting, but then I'm doing that for you. So I think we need to kind of question our thought process a little bit in terms of that. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah. So on a more positive note, so how do you see, what are Allie Beetham has a question. Can you provide some tips on how to best showcase your creativity and suggest new and innovative ways to do long existing processes in your job as women? But so more broadly, how do you have tips on how, if you have ideas and innovations as a woman and rising leader, how do you get those heard and seen?
So since something just came up, I'll just speak up. I think that for me, if you want to get your ideas across, find an advocate. Find those leaders that in your organization that have your, that are your advocates for whatever it is. You know who they are. Find those advocates, get in touch with them, talk to them for them to help you to get what you need. Sometimes they may not be listening to you, but they might be listening to that other individual. So I think it's important to find allies and advocates in your organization and may potentially be outside of the organization, but that's one of the suggestions.
I'm a big proponent of change and making things better and improved, but I also have that background in psychology, my undergrad, and I feel like being a change agent or studying change and how people change is a big part of that. And you can't expect somebody to come in and just bam, be doing something different the next day. So it's not how you say it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So, you might want to present it in a special way. You might want to ease it in. You might want to, like talk it up in some way. Also, like Karen said earlier, just become very well versed in that and know what you're talking about and be able to defend, your innovation or whatever. I'm in this FinTech program and, like that was my background. I was like, I really wanted to learn more about that topic and to be able to advance in that way. So.
Yeah, I'll build on what Lauren said just a little bit. One of the great things that happened to me in my career, by sheer dumb luck, I had nothing to do with it, was that when I joined the city of Charlotte, they were going through a significant financial system conversion, which involved a multi-year change management curriculum and approach of the ODL. And that skill set and tools you get from becoming very well versed in change management is incredibly invaluable. So that would be if you're looking for ways to improve how to get your ideas across, do some research into change management theory, and I think that that will be helpful.
Great, thanks. So another question from Elizabeth Landrum. What do you do when a manager says you're too nice? How do you balance being too nice with being assertive? Which is basically, how do you balance the leadership roles, right? Women are supposed to seen as a certain way, whereas leaders are seen as assertive.
No one's ever told me I'm too nice. So Lauren, I'm a little bit
I don't
snarky.
think anybody's ever told me that either.
Yeah, someone has told me.
I'm that person who tells people what I'm thinking on the spot, but it's I don't fear confrontation, and that's the thing. I think that you have to be kind of willing to face it spot on, like if you need to talk to somebody. Also, I think just that whole having empathy thing, like understanding something from somebody else's perspective, and like kind of, I'm very introspective. So, like if I have a conversation with someone, it didn't go super great, I like to go back and have a resolution for that, So, I mean, I think that it's come from years. My dad says that I'm diplomatic. So it comes from years of, like working with tough people or working with people who are not so tough. And like, you just have to find that balance and find who you are in that. And if that's being super assertive, then be it.
So go ahead, Phin.
Oh, I was gonna, no, you go ahead. You may have other questions. Go ahead.
No, Tabitha raised the point about appearance, and have you ever found appearance to be a barrier or challenge in public service? For example, I was brand new, straight out of MPA, well, MPP, going into the federal government. I felt the need to dress older and like dowdy in the federal government to look like age appropriate. Have you ever faced, challenges in that sort of realm, or in terms of appearance and looking the part?
So I have not, but what I would say is that I am a very feminist kind of person. So I, from appearance, everything. So I don't change who I am in that manner. I'm going to present myself how I want to be presented. And so never really have tried to tone down or change who I am. And I know that people say that, sometimes there's been few leaders who have said, you got this chip on your shoulder a lot of times. And well, that is partly because there's so much at stake. I feel like, so much work to be done. So, but at the same time, I don't think even just in terms of appearance, no, I don't, I am who I am. I present myself, and in a very feminine way. I dress very, very much in that manner, and I think it's okay. But what's important is how you come across, if you're confident in yourself and who you are, others will see that confidence. So.
I listen to an ELGL, that's Engaging Local Government Leaders. It's another organization you should look up. Podcast. They have a podcast called GovLove, and one of the things that they brought up on that, which I quote all the time, is, I'm not smarter in a pair of khakis than I am in a pair of jeans. So like, I think that's where we're kind of headed, is more of a casual look. I do dress up, and I do, I have the clothes, so I have to wear them. I like to look good, but I think that makeup versus no makeup thing is really, like, it's a struggle for me, I think. I mean, throughout quarantine, I haven't worn makeup a lot. So like, this is the first time in a while. So yeah, I mean, I just feel like you should be able to be yourself. And when you are in situations that are more professional, maybe up it a little bit, but yeah, I don't feel like you should dress a certain way just to be in a position.
So in our last 5 minutes here, this hour flew by. Can you guys talk a little bit about the work that you've done in advancing women in leadership? I feel like you've all done some sort of diversity work. And I know you were working with GRA efforts in the city, and Lauren, you've worked with stuff with your professional associations, and Phin, you're in the office of, well, you are the diversity, equity, and inclusion manager for the county. So what sort of things have you seen in your job and efforts on that sort of front?
Okay.
I guess I can go on this one.
There are two things that I can point to specifically that I think I'm most proud of. And one is the work on paid parental leave for the city of Charlotte that was enabled by the Opportunity Task Force recommendations, putting that paid leave in place for all employees, men and women, all levels of the organization, all work types. I think that that is critical on many, many different fronts. We don't have it in Davidson yet, but we're working on it. The other thing is being very explicit from a policy perspective around the ability of employees to take leave for issues around domestic violence. I think that that is critically important. I think that there are a lot of folks who struggle in that space silently and quietly and feel compelled to continue coming to work when they really need to be taking care of things in the judicial system. So making that a more appropriate and explicit, this is something that we support you in as your employer if you need to take time away to go deal with some of these issues. I think that those two things tend to impact women more, although it really is a broad employee initiative. But those are two things from a kind of HR policy standpoint that I think are important.
Like you said, I worked with NCLGBA founding a Women in Leadership series, and they've been panels. I've worked with diversity, equity, and inclusion groups. I actually helped to bring the committee in at Cabarrus County when I worked there. And yeah, so not just for women, but for all people, all people of diversity, diverse backgrounds, and you know, LGBTQ groups as well.
So I would just add that, you know, my work is around DEI, and in that it's serving everyone, making sure that everyone has outcome. I don't focus on particular on women, but it's particular, it's combination, it's that intersectionality between race and gender in that manner. But I think for my organization, we know that women of color are not in those higher leadership positions, and we need to be better at that. We need to ensure that women are promoted, women are hired in these leadership positions. And I think that the county is working hard at that. I think we have a lot of women, particularly white women in leadership positions. We do not have as many women of color. So that is something I know that's an interest that we are working towards. But the work itself is about providing outcomes for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all for being on this panel, for sharing your stories, and for your efforts that you've had in your own roles in advancing women in public service at the local government level. It's amazing. So thank you. I see Michelle has joined us, so I'm sure she's here to wrap us up.
This has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you all for sharing your insights on the importance of mentorship, that women in leadership can look any way that you choose to design it, that there's no one model. Thank you for that. Thank you for encouraging women to show up as their most authentic selves in whatever leadership role that they play. Thank you for talking about the importance of accountability and what that looks like, and for bringing up how gender plays a role in what accountability looks like. Thank you for that. I've taken so many notes. This has been great. I want to thank everyone who showed up for our discussion today. The questions and comments were absolutely amazing. I look forward to seeing hopefully all of you again, and you'll participate in additional discussions in the future. Thank you again, Dr. Piatak, for leading this wonderful discussion. Thank you, Karen, Whichard, Lauren, Tayara, and Phin for all of your insights on women in leadership and women in public service leadership. Thank you to our audience. We look forward to seeing all of you again in January for our discussion on educational equity and access to technology as a social determinant of health. We will have that information posted on our website. Our discussion participants that month will be Dr. Courtney Harris with Junior Achievement of Central Carolinas, Dr. Cammie Anderson, who is the founder and CEO of Bilingual Brown Babies, and Dr. Frank Barnes, who is the Chief of Equity and Accountability Officer with Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, and our moderator will be Sonia Gant, who is the Executive Director of the CMS Foundation. That will be on January 12th, 2021 at 12 noon. Again, thank you to everyone for participating in our December panel. We wish everyone happy holidays and grace and blessings into the new year. Take care, everyone, and thanks again.